They do that because you spoke
Oh yeah,
German
oh
fluently?
yeah. Oh, I could speak. My mother at home from the time I was a child, that's all we talked at home was German.
Right.
I went to Germany in '34. I came back. I couldn't speak English. They kept me out of school for about 2 weeks till I could start picking it up.
When you had to watch these 50 German POWs, was this in Florida?
Oh yeah, they were given orders. They were told where they were going. In the meantime, they gave me a list of things to talk to them in German about what their job was going to be. So I had to show them around the base as to what we were talking about: cutting the lawn, working in the kitchen, cleaning, painting. They had a whole list of what these prisoners were going to do. Some of the kids were 16, 17 years old.
Did they show any
They were happy.
bad will toward
They
you?
were happy to be here
Why?
because they didn't want any part of the war.
What did you do on the last day of your service?
I was separated in New Orleans. I spent 2 days in the French quarters with a bunch of buddies. Had a good time. Went to the Bellingrath Garden, the largest garden of azaleas in the country. It's acres of flowers you had never seen.
From there, you took a train to New York City.
I took a train from New Orleans to New York, and then a bus home. I worked for the A&P when I came out of service. I went back, worked with a gentleman that lived in Hillsdale by the name of Deal, who was the manager of the A&P in Cliffside Park. And during my high school years, to make money, the A&P used to be closed. No A&Ps were open at night. There was no A&Ps in that area that were open at night. I used to take a bus from Westwood to Nunges's and get the orange and black, get to the store, whatever time I could get there. I'd leave high school. If I had nothing else, I could, not every day, but whenever I could do it, I'd get down there. I'd get down to the store maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock, sometimes just before closing. Sometimes the store was already closed, but he had other people working there. That store was very busy. Anyway, I did that until I graduated. I worked part-time there. When I came out, the first thing, Mr. Deal says, "You're going to get a job full-time." He says, "I got it already arranged for you." So I went to Patterson, got all the particulars done, and I started in Cliffside Park. And within 3 or 4 months, they started transferring me around. I worked on the avenue, and then I started heading north. My first stop was Dumont. Then they sent me up to Spring Valley, and then they brought me down to the little store in Park Ridge. Had a little store by the railroad station.
Were you a manager?
No, I was a clerk.
Clerk.
They were breaking me in to learn, to become a manager.
Right.
So anyway, from Park Ridge, I went to Hillsdale. I became the assistant manager in Hillsdale. And 1949, when I got married, they made me the manager of the little A&P in Wyckoff, right out in the corner of Wyckoff Ave. It was a really tiny store, and that was my big stepping stone. I made many friends there, and one thing led to another. Sam Brain was the big operator at that time. He was the big construction man in this area. And we became good friends, and he said to me one day, he said, he says, "I got property down the street, so maybe you could talk to one of the bosses. We'll build a store." So I did. I spoke to my supervisor and told him about it. They brought the real estate man out, and sure enough, it started. Well, during that interim, they put me out into training again for a bigger store. And at that time, they had a Westwood opening and a Park Ridge opening, Wyckoff opening. So the bakery representative from the company at that time was Jane Parker, was the big bakery. They had a big bakery in New York. He said, I just want to tip you off on something. He says, there's 2 stores opening. And he says, don't be disappointed, he said, but be very happy because I know you're going to get one of them. So anyway, when they told me I was going back to Wyckoff, it's not a real big store, but it was a nice sized store. Anyway, he opened Westwood at that time. I said, boy, I would have loved to have Westwood. But anyway, that was my stepping stone. Wyckoff was my stepping stone. Back to Wyckoff, and from there they brought me to headquarters. I managed the headquarters store for 3 years, and they brought me back to Westwood. Business wasn't too good, but the boss, the president of this division, called me up. He says, we checked out on you. He says, you have a pretty good reputation. You're a fireman and you're belong to the Legion. He says, I think we're going to make a move and bring you to Westwood. Well, that was my next big stepping stone. I built the store back up, and I then became a supervisor, and then I became the price coordinator for the Eastern region, which was my best job. And then the Germans bought out, a fellow by the name of Tengelman bought out 2 major stockholders, the controlling interest, and they decided to close the Patterson unit. And basically everybody that was in that division, as far as office goes, they didn't have any room for you. So they told me, we're sorry, but you're going to have to go back as a manager. My kid says, Dad, you're not going back as any manager. And that's when I left A&P.
How did you meet Erica, your wife?
Living at Maris, I used to help Koenigs out during the war, bringing stuff that was hard to get. And we used to have our annual Fireman's Chiefs dinner there. And I became very good friends with Herman Kohler. So one day...
Where is that?
Where King's is. That whole area was one big restaurant, plus they had picnic grounds outside. The unions used to have their days out there. It was big. Anyway, one day Herman said to me, he says, you know, he says, you got any free time in the evening? He says, would you like to make a few bucks? He says, you want to come down and bartend? He says, let me know. I said, oh yeah, sure. So I did. I'd get a night or 2. So I was there about 6 months bartending, and Herman says that you're going to have some of your friends having a big party here. They have what they call the Workmen's Comp Group of the business people in the Pascack Valley. And lo and behold, who's one of them? Was Carmel Canzaneri, one of our charter members in the Post.
Yeah.
He knew, you know, about me working, and at that time, I wasn't going steady with anybody. So anyway, the night of the affair, it was snowing like anything. So there was no business at the bar. So Herman says, go ahead inside, enjoy yourself. So Canzaneri's sitting there with his wife. There's a seat next to her. And I sat down, and the first thing you know, I met my wife-to-be. 6 months later, we were married.
You said to her first, do you like to dance?
Yeah, well, that was the first question I asked her, yes. That's what got us started.
And children?
We had 4 children. Unfortunately, we lost our oldest daughter 5 years ago. We had 3 girls and a boy, and they're all married.
And their names are?
We had Doreen's the one that passed away.
Okay.
Then Patty was second, and Karen was third, and Rick, Fred Jr., was the 4th one. Then we have 8 grandchildren. All but one is married. The last 3 are all going to have babies within the next 3 months, 4 months, November, December, and January, as those are Karen's 3 daughters. That'll give us, if everything goes right, one's going to have twins, and the other ones each have one. That'll give us 10 great-grandchildren.
Freddie, your feelings on the war, on World War II, your feelings?
Well...
You did mention earlier, and if you had mentioned again, when you visited Germany.
Well, that's what started it, as far as getting to the point about how I felt about the war and everything else. I went to Germany. My mother's family was very well to do. I went to Germany in 1934 with my mother. And my mother's parents had a big apartment building in the valley of Plauen. Plauen was a city of 300,000 people. And my grandfather had the bakery. Downstairs was a big bakery shop. And then during the months, people that rented from other houses or something, in that time, everything was being paid in silver dollars because they had boxes of paper money in their rooms upstairs that went bad from the war. So they were getting paid in silver dollars. I used to take the money in the bag, not a lot at one time, but I used to run up to the bank all the time. And on Friday, they have what they call the marketplace on the top, right in the middle of the city, in that particular part of Plauen. And they had vendors of all kinds, and they had what I thought was hot dogs. So the first time I got one, I thought it was the best hot dog I ever ate. In fact, I had two that afternoon, that evening, and I found out I was eating horse meat, but I'll tell you, it was the best hot dog I ever had. But what really struck me, I'll never forget it to this day, my grandmother's place was down the bottom in the valley, and I used to have to walk up quite an incline to the top. I used to walk back down, and as I'm coming to go into the street there, all of a sudden I see four guys dressed up in a whatever uniform you call them at that time, dragging this man out of the house, putting a rope around his neck, pulling him up on a pole. I freaked. I started screaming. I couldn't get to the house fast enough. One thing led to another when that happened. My grandmother...
You mentioned that they were Gestapo?
They were Gestapo. Oh, yeah. They told me the story of what was going on already, that they were taking Jews that were doing dirty against a regular German or a business person. And it just so happened that in that particular era, my father's other brother was in the twine business in Germany. And every time he went to a manufacturer or business, Plauen was a very, very heavily industrial city, that whole area. Anyway, he always got underbid. And my uncles would tell him, he says, that's what's happening here in Germany. And Hitler's going to get rid of him. So when that happened, when the war came about, and what was going on over there, because there were other stories, and then as the stories came out, what happened to the Jewish people, I had no use for them whatsoever. And that's even when I took care of the soldiers that come in, I was very nice, but I just didn't like the opportunity of being able to do something to you know, help the cause over there, because it was bad. It was bad. And that gave me every indication as to when everybody asked me, you know, why I waited so long to join the service. Well, it just so happened that I wasn't in the position because of my mother, and it finally got to me, because I was losing all my buddies were, because I was a year behind all my buddies that I went to school with, because I was out of school for 2 years, right? It finally got to me. I said to my mom, I said, I'm going to enlist, hon. She said, so you want to do what you want to do, you do it, right? So when I enlisted, I had the opportunity of finishing high school or going in right away. I said, no, I think I'd like to finish high school. So that was it.
Right. You joined the American Legion, and how many years have you been a continuous member of the American Legion?
Thanks to Patsy Mara, 68 years.
68 years.
When I came home on emergency leave, whether it was the second or third night, or maybe the first night, I don't know. But I'm sitting down having supper, and he brings out the piece of paper. He says, you're going to join the Legion right now. He says, you sign your name right here. Well, he took me up to the Legion. I couldn't believe the place. The walls were brown with snowballs in yellow potted all over it, potbelly stove in the back, potbelly stove on the side. We had nothing.
And that's
Half a ceiling, half an open ceiling.
and that's 98 Legion Place, which
Yes.
is the building today.
It's the
It's
same
still there.
building. You never know it.
Yeah.
It's just wonderful.
You mentioned Patsy, Pasquale Mara,
Yeah,
and his wife, Christina. Patsy Mara is the father to our Gabe Mara.
that's right. And Joe and Mike were the other two boys. And Joe was my best man at the wedding. Joe got hurt when the Legion and the fire department used to have donkey baseball over here in the ball field to raise money. Got kicked by a donkey. And he wound up in the hospital, and as years went on, he developed cancer. He had a big job with American Airlines. He worked in headquarters. Him and I, and then when I was working at Mara's, also to make an extra dollar, I was selling centerpieces. I had Gay working with me, making table centerpieces, and I was selling Christmas trees on the corner of Park Avenue. I had Gay working for me, and Cal Piper, who was a Legionnaire,
Right.
and Fred Assman, who was a Legionnaire. I had quite a business.
You were a past commander of the Legion. What years were you?
49 and 50.
Any final comments you'd like to make that I didn't bring up or you'd like to bring up at this point?
Well, the one thing that really brought me into the Legion was what Patsy Mara presented, taking care of a place that nobody else really did. And being a Legionnaire, I wanted to do what was right and do whatever I could. But what really got me started was John Marcella. I used to walk from school. We had a woman that used to take care of me when I lived on Lodge Avenue. But when I got into the second grade, I used to walk to my father's store at lunchtime. And I could walk through the ball field, past the firehouse, and have a sandwich and go back. And I always used to stop at the firehouse. The fire trucks were out sometimes. And John Marcella at that time already, Mrs. Marcella told me this story. When I was a little baby, he used to come over and play ball, like bounce a ball in front of me. One thing led to another. So during that era, different times, my father had groceries to go to the firehouse. John Marcella would take me up with the wagon and go into the firehouse, put me on a fire truck. In fact, he took me out on a fire truck. And it became a real friendship.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the date now, but in February, I think at 43, I'm waiting for Tiedeman's school bus to take us to high school on the corner of Park Avenue. The siren goes off, it's snowing and raining. Fire truck comes roaring down Park Avenue. Johnny Marcella's standing up, cranking the siren. No windshield at that time on a fire truck. Have an accident. He goes flying off the truck. He hit the curb. He was in bad shape for years, in and out of the hospital, so on and so forth. So anyway, I used to visit him. I went into service. When I came out, I was his bat boy. That's another thing I forgot to tell you. I was his bat boy when the Blue Sox had a big baseball team here. Hillsdale was known for baseball. The big leagues used to practice here. Anyway, when I came out of service, within a day or two, the first thing I did was I went over to the store, and he called me in the back. He says, I want you to start that's the way he talked to you. I want you to start a baseball team. He says, I'll pay for it. So I said, what else could I ask for? I brought it up to the Legion. We went ahead and we started. We had a baseball team in no time, and a good baseball team. He was the first donator. Then I spoke to Herman Cola over there. Between the two of them every year, they practically paid for what it cost us to run the team, and the friendship never stopped. He used to come down and play cards with us, and to this day, because the Gertenbachs had a farm on Piermont Avenue, my father used to get vegetables from them, and I grew up with the Gertenbach's son, and what's her name, the mother, the daughter, she was older than I was, but we never stopped the friendship. I used to visit her, John's wife, every month or two.
Freddie, how long were you connected with the fire department, the Hillsdale Fire Department?
I hit my 65th year, June the 6th. 65 years.
Yeah.
That all came about what happened during my era with my mother, for what they did for my mother.
Yeah.
Because, in fact, I came home on emergency leave. The fire department was having their annual card party in the old Catholic church across the street. And I went in there and thanked them. And I says, I want to join the fire department when I come out. And Rudy Appel says, no, you're going to sign right now. So I did sign the book, but I had to wait. There was other people ahead of me.
Yeah.
So it was a couple of years before, I became active fireman. And the fire department and the Legion also petitioned this town to buy that field. It was going to be sold by the Hillsdale National Bank at that time. They was going to put a development in there. And we went house to house, and the town wound up buying it. In fact, we got a monument on the corner that, we dedicated that field to the Legion. And my life today, George, is taking care of the sick and unfortunately the dead. I keep in touch with a fellow by the name of Fitzpatrick. He used to have the trucking agency. He was an ex-chief. I keep in touch with Rudy Dreyer, who was an honorary member.
Yeah.
I keep in touch with Neil Began, who's handicapped. He can't get out of the house anymore. But all the fellas that are still living out of the area, I have one of our ex-chiefs lives in Indiana. I call him, and the Legion. I could talk out. We had a fellow by the name Becker.
Beckers, yeah.
We had a Legionnaire's mother by the name of Schramm. Could never find where the son was. He wound up in Chicago in Flanders Field. This guy, Becker, he used to work with every post in the area, anybody, to track down wherever he could find information for different